Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Lehman College has taken a hard look at an overlooked and neglected social issue and put together a comprehensive plan to combat it. We're going to let our guests tonight explain exactly what it is, but I will say at the outset, it's an example of a Bronx college thinking outside the box and putting resources into addressing an important Bronx family issue. So please join me in welcoming the Director of Clinical Education and Clinical Services at the Lehman College Speech and Hearing Center. It is Leslie Grubler. Miss Grubler, I want to get it right. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And the Director of Clinical Education and Clinical Services at Lehman College. It is Professor Lynn Rosenberg. Professor, nice to have you with us. Ms. Grubler, let's just start with you. I didn't want to give it away. I didn't want to explain it wrong. What have we done with a pediatric feeding center at my alma mater, Lehman College?
So this past fall, we developed a pediatric feeding suite with all of the supplies necessary to meet the needs of children 0 to 5. The program was funded by the New York City Early Intervention Program. We happen to be an academic partner of New York City Early Intervention, and so we sat down this past summer and said, what does the Bronx need? What do our children need? What does the family need? How can we better the community? And so we decided to put that funding into developing the suite. In addition to the suite, we also developed 5 culturally themed, what are called home-based simulation rooms.
I really want to talk about that. Of course, culture and identity in the Bronx is so important. But I just want to go back to the fundamental concept. I was not aware, and I've told you this, that I was not aware that this was an issue. As I understand, 25% of children have eating disorders or have issues in this category. How did you know? How did you hear about it? What made you say not only is it something we want to teach or we want to learn about, but you wanted to create a whole center for that? Yes. That's a heck of a commitment to this issue.
Well, we are speech-language pathologists, and feeding is part of our scope of practice. And when you say 25%, that's a conservative figure. There is some research that reflects that it's as much as 33%. So that's, 25% to 33%, or one out of every 3. I mean, that's a lot, of children who are impacted by pediatric feeding disorders. And our program, our early intervention program, which is a New York City-based program, doesn't necessarily fund services for that specific service. So we recognized through many calls and referrals that we have received from parents, hospitals, medical facilities, that there was a demand out there that wasn't being met.
I watch the media. I'm involved in talking to even health professionals. Had never heard this before without knowing that it's such a big problem. Professor, let's just talk about some of the people who could be served by this. How do they know that their child has an eating disorder? I mean, some kids are a little finicky. I think I was finicky. Maybe I'm still a little bit finicky. But how do they know that it has crossed the line, that they need some help? Because, you have a baby, and what do they say? How's the baby? She sleeps, she eats, and she poops. That's what they say. Describe who the people are that need this service, that brought it to a point that Lehman College really created something unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's 2 things that happen. A lot of times parents will refer their child to the early intervention program, because the child's not walking on time developmentally, or they're not speaking. And then we go in and do an evaluation, and then part of our evaluation is always asking questions about feeding. And then the parent will say, oh yeah, he's 2 and he still only eats puree food. Or he's 2 years old and I can't get him to eat anything that's not green. So we'll then do an evaluation at that point.
And I'm just bad word digesting what you're telling me. So parents would notice a behavioral issue,
Correct.
and then in evaluation, either their pediatrician or if they were to come to you, you can identify that it's it's fascinating to me, and I hope folks are learning something about it. And so then what are you doing? What is the design of this, and how is that going to play to help those people deal with their children in an appropriate way?
Right. So in the early intervention, everybody, regardless of socioeconomic status, is entitled to a free evaluation through the early intervention program.
Am I allowed to applaud for that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. It was really about it being free and being accessible.
Right, for the evaluation.
An evaluation.
And then what happens if the child qualifies for other services, then they can qualify for feeding therapy. But a child will not qualify, and early intervention will not pay for feeding therapy for a child that does not qualify for another service, such as physical therapy or occupational therapy or speech therapy. So then you have this large group of children who don't qualify for other services, who have this tremendous or moderate to severe feeding disorder that get no help.
Which couldn't be more fundamental. You know, there's a public school in part of the Bronx where they have a hydroponic farm, and the big headline in front of the school is, "Your children will not learn to read if they're not fed." And this really fits right in. And so then you have feeding suites where you feed the kids, where you work with parents to feed the kids.
So the EI program is home-based.
EI?
Early intervention, is a home-based program.
Home-based.
So a therapist that gets assigned to the case will work with the parents.
A therapist from Lehman College?
No, from early intervention.
Early intervention.
So the program here is to bring in these children that cannot get services because they didn't qualify for the services through early intervention,
Wow.
or they can't find a therapist to serve them in the community. Then this idea came about to service the children in the Bronx community that cannot get the services when they need it.
Ms. Grubler, I've got to ask you, how long did you guys know that this was a problem and that it was something that you could, because it kind of came about, and I was like, wait a minute, this is like a real problem, and Lehman dedicated all this resource to it?
I think it came about post-pandemic, when so many early intervention agencies closed in the Bronx, and there was even less providers available to meet the needs of children. And so we were getting a lot of referrals. And the interesting thing, and Lynn had mentioned that when she's also an early intervention provider, and when she does evaluations in the home, it is a home-based environment, right? So the parents may have asked for services for speech or OT or something else, some type of physical impairment, but the parent then opens up because they're in this very safe, comfortable environment and shares about their child's, feeding issues, which they may believe at first are very minor, but in fact, we know that it impacts their health.
It's the simplest thing. Somebody of knowledge to talk to. Somebody that, I want to bring up my children to be happy and healthy. Right. I do want to mention, listen, this is only open since late October, right? So
this past fall is when we opened all of the rooms in the pediatric feeding suite as well.
I was thinking about the ribbon cutting.
Yes.
I think we got a picture of
October
ribbon.
23rd was our ribbon cutting ceremony.
And it was well celebrated.
Yes.
And then just talk about the we have a photo also of the pediatric feeding room. Talk about that feeding room.
Yeah, so we were able to fund it with many, many tools. So, for example, Talk Tools is a company that provides high chairs that are special for children with special needs. So we were able to purchase 5. I think they're about $500 each.
Right.
And other equipment like what's called the maroon spoons, which we have one here.
Oh, she brought one.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's see. What is the maroon? This is
Want
the
to talk a little bit about how you use it?
What is the maroon spoon?
So the maroon spoon is used for a couple of different things, but primarily for kids who have low muscle tone and they have poor lip closure. We teach them to use this spoon, the parents to feed them with what we call side spoon feeding. When you side spoon feed a baby, they use their lips. When you feed a baby like this, we're doing the work for them. So we want the lips to engage in the feeding process.
And so for a toddler or for a baby, this kind of gets them going.
Gets them moving, gets
Right.
their lips moving. Also, kids that are on the spectrum that have autism won't let utensils in their mouth, but for some reason they love these spoons, and these spoons are just a great way to start spoon feeding.
Right, and one thing I want to ask you about before we talk about the culturally sensitive rooms, I just want to ask you about texture. One of the things I read in the materials that were sent to me was that texture of food is important to a child.
So an older child once explained to me that when they were younger and they were given a ground consistency on something, it felt as if they were eating glass. So for these kids who have heightened or hypersensitivities, especially those kids that are on the spectrum, are very sensitive to textures. So some of them will only eat pureed food. And you can give them a plate of pureed food and put one pea in that pureed food, and they will find that pea and spit that pea out.
And let's just talk about the rooms. You mentioned the ethnically and culturally sensitive rooms. I guess that's for obvious comfort. And here in the Bronx, we've got to do that. Talk in specifics about why you created them and what's in them that will make people feel like a bit of home.
So when we say that we've created them, it really is we. The faculty, the students, staff, all participated in developing these rooms, the authenticity of these rooms, and curating them. And as a matter of fact, we had an ad hoc committee on the curation of the home-based rooms. So we put a lot of thought into which cultures were going to be represented.
I got a list here. Yeah. Highlight Hispanic, Caribbean,
right.
African, Asian, and Bronx culture,
and of course,
which I love.
the Bronx culture. I think we have 22 rooms, and these are
22 rooms.
We have 22 treatment rooms in the
I
Speech
wish
and
I
Hearing
could applaud
Center.
again.
Yes, and these are just 5 that are right now culturally themed home-based simulation rooms. But everybody's loving the Bronx room, and I don't blame them. But so the committee decided on what we would have in terms of the furniture, what would be adorning the walls, what items we would have, in the rooms that would spark interest or comfortability. We had one member of the committee who said, we've got to have a metal tin, the metal tins that you have cookies in, but when you open it up, it doesn't have cookies. It's a sewing box, because we all have sewing boxes. But they came up with all of these incredible...
I just want to be very specific.
Yeah.
Because obviously the obvious nature of, Hispanic, Caribbean,
Yes.
African, and Asian cultures. What do you put in Bronx culture?
Yeah.
I assume you watch BronxNet television and make determinations
Well,
about
what do we
that.
know about the Bronx? The home of hip hop, right? So there's hip hop memorabilia there, a wall. There's also lots of references to Yankee Stadium, various streets that are very popular and known there, the subway system as well. For the Bronx room. So who knows, in future, and we also have represented the Bronx Zoo, and
so there it is. That certainly defines the Bronx room. Let's talk about how it's been since it opened. I mean, have people come in? Is the outreach working out for you? I mean, you have some stories to tell. You're looking over here. I'm not sure who should respond to that.
I can respond a little bit, and then she can add to it. As expected, there's been numerous phone calls for parents that want to bring their children in.
They've already started
without even the advertising.
And we didn't even put it on
aspect,
TV yet.
Right. That's so true. And hospitals, Jacoby and Montefiore.
The hospitals are referring.
Yes, medical doctors. Thrilled.
Who's going to respond? How unique is this? In other words, this kind of center, is this Lehman College putting the first one to put a stake in the ground?
I do want to say that it's unique in that it's free. That's a big part of it.
That's the unique.
That's one of the unique things of it. If you're able to go to a hospital, you have to have insurance, or you have to be able to pay for it. So the hospital.
Well, I'd like to find insurance that's going to cover it, but that's that's a whole other show.
So that's unique.
And I think the other unique part is that, remember, we're Lehman College, so we're training students. Right. We're training the future speech-language pathologists.
Oh, yes,
so not
important.
only are we training them in pediatric feeding, but we're also training them on cultural responsivity. And the two are very powerful. We already know that there's a shortage in the Bronx of providers for early intervention 0 to 5 care. Certainly, there's even a more significant shortage in those who are trained in pediatric feeding. So
I have to say, and yes, it is my alma mater, but this is very high-level thinking and evaluating of community and what community needs, right?
Yeah. We also, I designed a pediatric feeding course as an elective that the students take. So that was something that was newly introduced in the last couple of years, because out in the environment, students were coming out of other colleges and universities with no training in feeding. And so therefore we need to train our students to be able to go out and work in it as well.
Think about this. What would be more fundamental for it's like all the food insecurity that we've been dealing with. What would be more fundamental for families? Again, I keep the check boxes in the Bronx. Families, that's who we are, ethnically diverse. I mean, we know exactly who we are. So people have come in and it's been working to...
Yeah, I mean, the phone calls have not stopped.
Yeah.
Wow, isn't that...
And
I guess it's wonderful.
It is wonderful. It is. And not to mention community members have just walked in saying, could we see,
Have you been able to incorporate this in like the normal speech and hearing department budget, or in other words, you just started a new program, or is this something that requires
additional funding? Funding? And that was from our partnership with Early Intervention, New York City Early Intervention. Wow. And they had given us the funds as a result of our partnership, and we could use it in a way that we saw fit, as long as it met the needs of children 0 to 5.
But then we have other issues that come up. In other words, it's almost like you get them in the door and then you can talk about other issues like speech issues, language and literacy. Yes. And do you find that you're able to do those kinds of things with people?
Oh, absolutely. I think
this must be your passion, because this is what you teach.
It's one of my passions. But pediatric feeding, yes, is one of my passions, because the stress level for parents when you have a child who is not gaining weight, who gets diagnosed with failure to thrive, parents blame themselves, there's something wrong with what they've done. It is extremely stressful to have a kid who won't sit at a table, who won't eat, who you have to puree all their foods for. So it's very stressful for the parents. So when we go into their home, they're very open to start talking about it. But if I didn't know enough to do a screening, if I'm just there to do a speech evaluation, I know to do a screening. What are they eating? What textures are they eating? Are there any behaviors around eating? Sometimes you'd leave a house and not even know that the child had any kind of issue, because the parents don't know that that's even an issue to discuss with someone who can provide a service for them.
And culturally, they may not want to discuss it either. Yeah. Then we don't know. We can't help them.
After all, and you alluded to it, Ms. Grubler, after all, it is a college. And so it was mentioned, I forget which one of you mentioned, that students from other colleges come here. And so you have graduate students, and I saw some interviews with graduate students who were like, wow, it must be a revelation for them.
It's an incredible learning experience for them, because they have to become aware of what people from different cultures consider as appropriate for that. For example, that first year of life, what you're going to be feeding your child, second year of life, third year of life. So they really have to reflect on what they've personally experienced, and then also become educated on other cultures.
Right. And that's where the cultural thing, if you were to talk to, let's say, an Asian person, and then talk about, American food, that might not be what they cook at home, that might not be what they want.
Correct.
Did you have to do a lot of studying about different cultures and what children eat?
Absolutely. Sometimes you have a kid who has really hypersensitive to flavors and tastes, and you go into a home where they're making Indian food and they're using curry and all these spices, and have to say to the parent, okay, we need to feed them something else. You can't do that. You need to be aware of culturally what their diet is like, what they're feeding, and their schedule. We try to put kids on a feeding schedule, and in some cultures, they eat it late at night, 11, 12 o'clock at night, or, they're not being fed in a high chair. They're being fed while they're sitting on the floor on a couch. So there's a lot of differences in different cultures around eating. So.
So you've been able to do that, and then you provide the foods as well.
No, we ask the families to
Do you
bring
ask
the
the families to bring the foods, and that would help because
right,
you
absolutely, right.
It's hard enough running a cafeteria. Another thing is just to talk about other services offered at the center. I think it's important to know Lehman College Speech and Theater building and all that stuff, but there's a lot going on there that's even larger than
there sure
this.
is. So we've been talking about.
I got to say, she brought brochures. There's all kinds of brochures here.
Thank you.
But go ahead.
So we've been talking about our early childhood clinic, which provides services to children 0 to 5. But we also have a language and literacy clinic for school-age children. We have an adult neurogenic clinic for adults with traumatic brain injury or strokes. And we also have a clinic that serves across the lifespan, so 0 to 5, school age, and also adults. In addition to those services, and those are treatment services, right? We also provide diagnostic evaluations. And again, that's across the lifespan to 0 to 5, school age, and adults as well.
Wow.
So, and in addition to that, we provide services for our own Lehman College students through a College and Me program. Lehman College students who are neurodivergent, and our students work with them as well to help them. So,
tell me one anecdote, one story that you know of, something you've experienced either in the center or through this whole process that people would want to know about, that really exemplifies how important this is, how unique it is, et cetera.
Well, there's a lot of those stories.
I know it's always a challenge.
It's
Name
a
one.
lot of this child that I worked with a few years ago who would not sit at a table to eat with their parents and would only eat puree foods. Over a period of time, we were able to get the child first to just tolerate food on their plate, tolerate food in the room, tolerate food on their plate, and then actually eat, a full meal. So
how?
It would take longer than the time we have left to explain that. But it's a behavior modification. It's a desensitization by just getting the child to tolerate through a reward system. So, if you take a bite, you'll get to use the iPad. Or if you take a bite, you'll get to pick a toy. So it's actually, they're behavioral feeding disorders. And generally these disorders come first from something that's medical that creates this poor or bad experience with feeding, so they start to relate eating with unpleasant feelings. So we want to start,
or especially if parents who are eager are like, "Come on, you're going to eat," and then all of a sudden, I don't want to do it. Then they do it, but you change the dynamic.
You change the dynamic, and we work with a lot of kids who you call picky eaters. That you mentioned before that you were a picky eater, and I'm
really being exposed here.
There's a saying that says picky eaters are not born; they're created. So that's something that we work with.
As a grandparent, just thinking about from a parent's point of view and a grandparent's point of view, the families must be thrilled, especially because unlike everywhere else where you got to show an insurance card or you got to open up your checkbook, to be able to do it and walk into, of course, beautiful Lehman College is just unbelievable. So how do we keep the phone ringing? We tell people to call. I mean, I got a number here. I got an email. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, that would be helpful. Yes, 718-960-6084. And our email address is speechhearing.center@lehman.cuny.edu.
And so people who have heard what we're talking about and say, maybe this could help us, or I'm not sure, then pick up the phone and call. And what I'm thrilled about is that you do add a phone number, because a lot of people to start in sending an email and then you wait for the email. The people who work with me here know that I love to be on the phone, and you have somebody picking up the phone.
We have somebody picking up the phone, and we also have a translator squad for the many languages that we serve as well.
Well, I have to say, congratulations to you. Anything else that you want to mention to the public?
I think we covered a lot.
We covered a lot, yeah. And the future, we talk about expanding, talk about doing more.
Yeah, I think we're going to be developing for the spring a bedside swallow.
What does that mean?
Bedside swallows.
She says it like I would know what it means.
Of course.
So that's related more to what we call dysphagia, which is a diagnosable swallowing disorder, which is separate from the behavioral feeding disorders that we've been talking about today. So that's primarily more for people who've had a stroke or a head injury or any neuromuscular disorders. They lose the ability to swallow, to chew, to move a bolus or a handful of food from the front of the mouth to the back of the mouth. They may be aspirating, where the food's going into their lungs. They may be choking.
And
so
parents,
that's much more medical.
Again, I just love our parents. The parents don't know, and they're like, well, who can I call?
Right.
The number again, I got it here somewhere. There it is, 960-6084. They're going to put it up on the screen. I'm just thinking about win-win-win. It's a college.
Yep.
You're dealing with undergraduates, you're dealing with graduate students, you're looking at the community and saying, how can we serve the community? You uncovered, to me, something that really is there, but nobody knows about, and you have talented people. I'm just so proud of my alma mater. What can I tell you? Leslie Grubler, Director of Clinical Education and Clinical Services at Lehman College. Thank you so much. And Professor Lynn Rosenberg, Deputy Chair of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences. Thank you so much. You guys are absolutely great, and thank you for doing stuff for the people of the Bronx.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, that will do it for our program. Before we leave tonight, something totally different. I want to mention that during the debate that I hosted 2 weeks ago, I repeated a question submitted by one of the candidates that indicated that former State Senator Alessandra Biaggi was a member of the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. In fact, Ms. Biaggi was never a member of the DSA. We regret mischaracterizing her affiliations. As for tonight, we need to thank our producer, Rebecca Hemick, our director, Will Guzman, the cast of thousands who work with us here in the studios, and of course, to you. Next week, we're still working on it. We've got a couple of really good options. We're talking about politics. We may talk about some interesting studies by the New York City Controller. We'll be back. We'll do a lot more. And we'll see you then. If the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, I'll be back. See you then. Good night.